In 1980, with the fall of Vietnam, which was the end of '79, I think, there were many, many refugees from Southeast Asia, starting originally from Vietnam, but then Cambodia and Laos. We even had some refugees from Hungary, if I remember correctly. And all of the organizations that helped these refugees were Christian. And so Shifu encouraged us to start the Buddhist Refugee Rescue and Resettlement Program at the City of 10,000 Buddhas. And it had programs for both the children and the adults. So the children came to our schools, and that was the point at which we sort of gave us enough students, so we then divided into a boys' school and a girls' school. Before that, we just had one school, boys and girls together. For the most part in elementary school, I think we had a high school for 2 or 3 years with boys and girls together. But when the refugee program started, then we divided it into a boys' school and girls' school, and the Sangha got much more involved. And then for the adults, there were several different training programs. So they learned English, and then they learned either, I think it was landscape design, or not design, but more like landscaping, how to do landscape and yard work, or they learned how to do custodial work. So, and then we found them jobs and places to live. At that point, California was considered impacted to have too many refugees, and so part of our agreement was, unless they stayed at the City of 10,000 Buddhas, and there weren't very many who did that, that we would find jobs and housing for them in other states. So we did resettle them all over the country.
So Sherpa, purely out of compassion, I remember him talking about, we need to do something about these refugees. We have to, help them. And at that time, it would the refugees couldn't come unless they had somebody to sponsor them. And there was only so much sponsorship. So anyone when we first started, every refugee we sponsored was somebody that got out of the camps that wouldn't have otherwise. So it was a really great service that Shiva wanted to do. But, then I had to come explain, Shiva, okay, yeah, well, that's all great, but, it's like this really complicated thing. Okay, well, fine, go do it. It's complicated, fine. So he'd always say, go, you meet with Washington, go, White House, good, go, do it. But it's complicated. So basically, and another thing I want to get across is his basic approach to us all the time was, you're supposed to do a really good job, and it's supposed to actually have a real impact, but you're not supposed to get attached at all to anything about it. So you can't get attached, but you have to do a really good job, and you got to actually do it in a way that actually is how whatever. If you're doing refugees, then you got to do it through the State Department. You got to do it right through the whole. So anyway, we said it. So eventually, after a lot of now, the reason the State Department wanted us was actually a very good reason, because I don't know if everybody knows it, but all refugees in the United States are resettled through private agencies, not through the government. And there's, I think at that time, 9 private agencies that resettle refugees. They were all Christian or secular. And there was no Buddhist or even Asian organization. And the issue was, one of the issues was monks, especially monks from Laos or Thailand that are monks for a week or a month. And I don't know if you know it, but in the refugee settlement programs and in immigration, monks are in a different category than the rest of the people. So distinguishing between monks that were 1-week monks and a monk that would come under the actual, laws of what they were trying to do with immigration was impossible for them to make any. Plus, there was most of the refugees coming were Buddhists, from Cambodia, Laos, and there was no contact with the Buddhist thing at all. So they saw us as an opportunity to have some being in touch with the Buddhist community and the Asian community, and since most of the refugees were coming from there. And then we were supposed to have an office in Washington, D.C. and in New York, but because the refugee programs meet in New York and the Washington, D.C., you're always doing stuff in the State Department stuff. So what I did was I just put a phone in my office with 202 and 212 numbers, so I knew whether it was coming from Washington or New York, and then pretended I was there. And then I just had open ticket. I just goes, 1 week I went 3 times, went back and forth. If there was a meeting, I just had an open ticket. I just went back and forth from San Francisco. So I would fly one day and come back the next. So I always, for the meeting, every week I fly to New York or Washington for 5 or 6 hours and then fly back. You know, just fly there and then fly back. But I always pretended like in these phones in the back of the Geary Hotel that I actually was at an office in Washington and New York, and they called the number and oh yeah, what's going on? We have a meeting, and said, oh fine, I'll be there. So the refugee program where we settled lots of refugees. I think Shifu was very compassionate, and we brought a lot of them up here. That's what that big building over there was full of refugees. And then we sent them out to different places from there after we'd done training and so forth. And I don't know, what, 4 or 5 years we've had in that refugee program, and it went pretty well. So that was again running something for Shifu's trip. So he had all these things that had to be managed, and so I and a couple other people were just sort of like, I was sort of I was in charge of just sort of managing all these ridiculous things and just kind of traveling around and taking care of stuff. And then Shifu would all say, yeah, how's it going? Oh, yeah, okay, Shifu. I remember one time I said, Shifu, I don't have even one thought between one thought and another. I don't have any space between one thought and another. He said, really good. You can't have any false thoughts. He said, you should have no space between one thought and another.
So this trip to Malaysia is really interesting. It was also at this time that we encountered the Vietnamese boat people who were trying to come off of Vietnam onto the shores of Malaysia and would be turned back to sea, many of them drowning because the country wasn't accepting at that time. And that's when Master Hua just almost, I could see the tears in his eyes and saying, can't let this happen. We have this big place at the city of 10,000 Buddhas. We're going to make room and invite these refugees to come here. And that's how we started the Rescue and Refugee Center here. Again, I saw the compassion, the immediate compassion on the spot to gather these people in. Some of them are still here.
他们早也不在这个世界上来，晚也不在这个世界来，偏偏等这个世界有大战的时候，倒是这个世界来看热闹。这个热闹一看呢，看得魂飞魄散，看得有的尸骨无存。俺们每天在这儿还是照常的吃喝玩乐，吃饭穿衣服睡觉，还过得很觉得自在的。这是没有正式临到头上，俺们恐怕忧愁也都会忧愁死。俺们大家应该反省，这些战争从什么地方来的呢？就是俺们心里的戾气造成的。我们心里没有祥和之气，就是产生战争了。
俺们这个，我怎么说，教育是真正的国防呢？你就有原子弹、氢气弹、死光，这些个武器都是害人的，都是硬碰硬的，都是以毒攻毒的，并没有一个祥和之气在这里边。这里边都是预备杀伤人类的最残忍的一种行为。所以不叫这个，我们叫人尽忠为国。为国，你想尽忠爱护自己的国家，你也要爱护其他的国家。你不能以你强国的这种地位去侵略那个弱小的国家你要爱护自己的国，也要爱护其他人的国。那么不用这个 武器、刀兵，这种去伤人去，那么自己你国防，你把人类都教导明白了，这是真正强国的一个根本道理。可是世界人呢，都是把这一点忽略了，只知道造飞机大炮怎么样去侵略人家。你对其他的国家你要侵略，你要去想夺人家国家的这个财产，这个布白和子女去把旁的国家的人都给抢了，这个就是对自己的国家自己的国不忠什么叫不忠呢？你侵略人家，你一定要损失很多的财产生命财产，牺牲了之后，你才能得到旁人的国家的财产，但是这已经有所损失了，你就有了其他国家的这个财产也得不偿失，将来其他的国家要强大了也来侵略你，所以这个你侵略旁人的国家，就是对自己的国家不重视不尽忠。这要爱国爱家爱生爱这个生命所以我们这个宗旨教育的宗旨是这样子。我今天呢，借着这个过时间的这个机会，来和你们大家讲一讲。